Hi, I'm Valerie Engelhart, and in this video I am going to be painting a loose, watery sun conure because whenever I have a new email subscriber, I ask a few questions, and one of them is if they have any pets and if they want to tell me about their pets. And one person actually responded that they have a sun conure, and I love these birds, and it hit me that I haven't painted one of these in so many years. And the last time I did paint one, it was part of a tutorial because I was still learning to do watercolor. So I immediately felt inspired to grab my brushes and give a go at painting this colorful, beautiful little bird. Now, I am using Arches cold press 140 pounds. And right now I'm really zoomed out and I'm just painting the eye, and notice how small that eye is on my paper. I picked the eye because I thought it was a good starting point to then branch out the rest of the bird. But I had to be very careful about how large it was and the placement on my paper. Now, you probably don't want to see the whole thing zoomed out the whole time, so bringing it in. And you can see I am using my fingers to measure out the different placements of the head of the bird. So because I don't sketch first, I am basing everything off of a picture I'm looking at, and I'm measuring everything based off of the eye. So around the eye is like a white bit, and so I'm measuring everything off of that white bit. And the top of the head is actually kind of flat, so I make sure not to make the top of the head too round. And I am using Daniel Smith Nickel Azo Yellow. This is a lovely transparent yellow that is beautiful in a super light color, but you can really pile that color on and make it a fairly decent mid-tone value. But right now, I am dancing around with my size 8 brush, leaving little gaps of white because we have feathers. I want this to look like a fluffy bird. I've gone in now with my Daniel Smith cadmium red hue, and I am just dropping that in around the face of the bird because it has a very rosy face. And I'm going wet into wet so that the red paint diffuses and spreads out naturally into the yellow. Now, right now, that looks really bold. And even as I was painting that, I was like, oh no, I think I went too strong there. But then I had to remind myself that I was going to go in with more water to get some beautiful watermarks, and watercolor does dry paler. And so if you put down a color and you're like, that's the perfect shade and value that I want, it's not, because it will dry, and it varies depending on obviously like the pigment and how thickly you applied it. But typically I find that it'll dry anywhere from like 30 to 50% lighter. And so even though that red, when I put it down, was like, oh no, that's a lot of red, it actually became exactly the red that I wanted it to be. I'm lifting a little highlight out of the eye right now. I did that by cleaning my brush, tapping. I used a paper towel to get the excess moisture off, and then did a little swoop line to make the eye look, well, alive and a little glassy. And then I'm dragging some of the pigment from the eye and from the surrounding feathers into that white area because I don't want it to be just like this stark white oval. I want, like, white reflects the colors around it. And so dragging in that pigment gives it a more lifelike look, even though I'm not going for a super realistic appearance. And if we look at the eye a little more, the left side of the eye, I have a nice hard line, but as we shift to the right, I've let it blur into that surrounding area, and I'm gonna leave it. I'm not gonna outline the entire eye because I like how it looks. It still looks like an eye, but it gives it a nice, loose, artsy look. And even though in this painting, the bird is gonna be sitting, birds are alive, and most birds that I see don't stay still for very long. So who knows, maybe it's about to start turning its head. I did leave on the right side room for the beak. So I'm leaving that as a hard edge. I will be adding the beak later once the paint has dried, because if I go add the beak right now, all of that red and yellow pigment will seep into it, and that's not the look I'm going for. I do want there to be a hard line there. So I started with the head, and I kept things light towards the base, and now I'm going in and adding more of that yellow to build out the body. Look at how those watermarks are starting to form on the head. It's creating the look of soft feathers without me having to do much of anything. And that's one of the things I love about watercolor is, well, the water does most of the work for me. And again, with the body, I am not using very long, smooth brush strokes. I am like dabbing the paper and I'm moving back and forth and keeping things textured and rough, because I'm okay with little white gaps and I want a bit of a jagged edge because this is a bit of a fluffy bird. And now I'm tapping in some of that red because the sun conure is really orange in color, but it's that yellow base with the red peeking through. And I don't like to mix my colors on like a palette. I like them to mix and mingle on the paper. And so the great way to do that is the wet in wet approach. But there, by dabbing in these little curved rows with that red, I have created the illusion of feathers without having to really do much of anything. Going in now, I'm going to place in one of the wings. I've grabbed, this is a Rockwell Canada color, on it diamond yellow. For this painting, I just wanted to pull things from my palette. Any of my palettes that I have nearby, I'm just grabbing whatever color kind of looks similar. And speaking of colors, let's go back to that red and that yellow while I paint the wing. So I tested 3 different reds on my nickel azo yellow before I settled on the cadmium red. And so even me, as an experienced artist with a good grasp of my color properties, I'm still surprised with how certain colors will mingle and react. So I highly recommend, before you jump into a painting, just take a scrap piece of paper and play around on it first. I really knew that I wanted to use that yellow. So what I would do is I'd plop down just a blob of yellow. I would pretend to paint the Conure's head. And then I dropped in some red. And first I dropped in some Permanent Red by Daniel Smith. And it wasn't looking the way I wanted. Well, that's fine. You know what looks really lovely? Sometimes dropping a magenta into that yellow. So I grabbed a quinacridone magenta, rinse and repeat, and no. It was not right. So 3rd time was the charm. I, on a scrap piece, painted the head again, dropped in the cadmium red, and it was like perfect. It sang. It was exactly what I needed it to be. So even if you think you know exactly what you want, just grab a little scrap piece of paper real quick and just play around. You might have some unexpected results. And if you're going to make a mistake with color, make it on that little scrap piece of paper first, because it would have really demoralized me to go in and work on the head the way I did and then have the colors not look the way I wanted. So I am working on the wings. The wing on the left is more pronounced, so a very similar technique to the body, but I'm leaving more hard lines. And that's that yellow, and I'm adding in the green. And around this point, I start to notice that there is blue, so I do go into my palette and grab some French ultramarine. But look at those watermarks, how they're forming. And it is creating that illusion of light and of soft feathers. Like, I'm not going to be going in and doing negative edge work or individually painting in the little bits of feathers. Like, I look at that, I see a bird, and those look like feathers. And you watched me do this. This is in real time. I have sped nothing up. And that's just the magic of watercolor. Popping a little more red against that wing to create some shadow from the wing to the belly. And lots of water. Because the focal point of my painting is going to be the head of the bird, that is where I'm going to want all of the detail or the greatest contrast in values. So eventually I am going to paint in the beak, and that's going to look interesting because beaks are hard and smooth versus soft, fluffy feathers. And typically on animals and humans, eyes are focal points anyway. I'm saying all that to illustrate that I don't want to go too detailed or too harsh on my colors or shapes on the belly of the bird because I don't want to be distracting. I mean, certainly pop in some textures. Make sure you give form with color, but keep in mind where that focal point is. So with the wings at the very bottom, I used some dry brush to just create some texture, and a little bit of that blue is bleeding away in the middle of the wing. That's because I wetted the paper next to the bird because I didn't want this to be so harsh on the wing. I did want some of it to bleed and fade just a little bit. So I'm using some water now just to soften some things. And this is really just a study. This was me getting really excited and going, I want to paint a bird. And so there wasn't too much of a plan going on for composition. And that's okay. Not every painting needs to be something that gets pitched to a gallery. You need to do these fun studies, I can't wait to go grab my brushes and just see what happens, because that's when you'll make discoveries and get those brush miles in, practice techniques, and maybe find a love for a subject that you haven't paid attention to in quite some time. So I don't sketch with a pencil, but I will sketch with a brush. And so I've grabbed, it's just a really dark color in my Rockwell Canada palette. I don't remember which one because I just looked and went, I need something dark. Let's grab you. It's either obsidian brown. I'm pretty sure it's obsidian brown. It could be a lapis color, but I'm pretty sure it's obsidian. So I outlined the beak, and now I'm just using water to drag that pigment around, but I'm doing it very carefully because the beak is smooth and it's a pretty precise shape, so I'm taking my time here. I did leave a small white line between the upper and lower beak, as well as leaving some shine where the nose would be and that area on the top of the beak. Now, I don't want it to be just one flat color, so I'm dropping in a little bit of that yellow on the top. And I'm going to drop in a little bit of that French ultramarine on the bottom. But first, I'm dragging that pigment down ever so gently to create a little bit of separation and shadow in the feathers. Because I don't know if you've ever noticed on birds, and this is why it's really good to really study your reference image, but I've noticed on birds there's under the beak, there's a bit of a separation in the feathers. And so by dragging that pigment down, I created that separation, but also connected the feathers to the beak, so it's not such a hard line all the way around. And that's just personal preference. I'm lifting out a little bit of a highlight by using a clean, damp brush. And I'm noticing that line on the side is a little harder than I want, so I'm trying to soften it. There we go with the blue. That's another tip if you are introducing a new color somewhere on your animal or a whole new segment. Try dropping color from elsewhere in your composition. So in this case, in my nice dark, I'll just say obsidian. In my obsidian, dropped some yellow on the top to indicate sunlight and the blue on the bottom to indicate shadow, but without being super precise. It was wet on wet, and it just ties in that beak to the rest of the bird. Going in with a liner brush now because I feel like I was losing some of that separation. And the beak was getting a little too light anyway, so I'm going to drag that pigment down. All right, at this point, I thought that maybe I wanted to add in a foot, just because, I don't know, it was one of those things where I thought maybe I do. And I started to put one in, and the paper was wet, and I knew it would diffuse, and that was fine with me. Also, by keeping it wet, it meant I could erase it if I decided I didn't like it. And wouldn't you know it, began to put it in. I looked at it and went, nope, this is not what I want. So I grabbed a paper towel, dabbed it off, and then fresh water just to disperse any of that leftover pigment. And so of course I don't completely manage to lift it away, but it works well enough. Add a little bit of yellow to distract it. And that's one thing about knowing the quality of your pigments. I knew that that particular paint would lift pretty easily, so I felt confident going in lightly. But if I had used like a phthalo color, ooh, I wouldn't have been able to lift that super well. There definitely would have been a stain left. So just anyone watching, know the properties of your paints. And I'm gonna call it finished. Gonna sign it on the side. Painting's not done till you add that signature. And here's the finished painting. If there's anything you want to see me paint, let me know in the comments because I'm always looking out for new subjects to explore. And if you want to see more, subscribe because I publish videos every Monday and Thursday. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!